Hello and welcome to Salt of the Earth, the podcast where we try to live slightly saltier lives. I am Thomas. This is Jonathan.
Hi.
And today we are going to be talking about a topic which I personally have totally mastered. Like, I'm the best at it. No one else is as good as me on this topic. And by that I mean I of course mean that we are talking about pride.
Wait. So are you saying they've totally mastered the topic, or totally mastered being prideful?
I've mastered conquering pride. By which I mean I am the most humble person to ever live.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Jokes aside.
Wait, you're joking?
What? Yes, I actually was joking. Okay. So pride. It's something that's kept coming up in several of our podcasts and just other things in life, and we felt it was going to be a really good thing to talk about. We hadn't actually talked about it yet.
Yeah.
Last time I did something on it was one of my first original 4 videos, which I for some reason decided to animate. If you guys have actually watched that one, then you're old legends. But yeah, it's a very important issue because I think it is one of the primary pitfalls of people in general, and Christians are no less susceptible to it. In fact, maybe we're even...
Yeah, I think it's one of the sins Christians are most vulnerable to. And
part of that is that pride kind of hides itself, I think. A proud person doesn't recognize that they're proud.
Yeah.
And if you tell them that they're proud, they're going to get angry at you. By the way, I have a bit of a stuffy nose, so I may sound weird.
Yeah. Well,
so, go ahead.
It's an interesting thing because as Christians, we're supposed to be good and imitators of Christ. And that's the highest goal we can set to achieve, right? The best standard we can go for. And then it's easy to feel like we're doing good at that, and then that can lead us to feel pride in our success. And then that in itself is diminishing from our success. It's a weird thing to think about because...
Yeah.
And I know the answer to this. The answer is that because it is not through our own strength that we become like Christ, it is through Christ in us. We should not take pride in what Christ has done through us.
Right, and that's even something Paul wrote about and is written about. Kind of it runs throughout the Bible. There's stuff in the Old Testament too, of one of the ways you can avoid being prideful is to realize that the abilities you have and everything that you are is not from yourself, or all the great things you've done is not because of you. And so if you realize that, and then if you properly attribute those things to ultimately who gave them to you, God, then you'll avoid pride. And a very easy and common way to be prideful is to do the opposite of that and to attribute too much to ourselves.
Yeah.
I think, so a couple definitions of pride. I think I have these stuck in my head somewhere. One is viewing yourself as better or more important than others. And another is believing yourself to be more than you actually are. And that goes pretty well in line with the verses in Scripture that talk about it. Let's both agree right now that we're just going to skip the whole pride is bad thing. I don't think anybody needs to hear that. There are a lot of verses about it. We could spend a lot of time on it, but I don't think it's beneficial to anyone.
Yeah.
No one who's struggling with pride, doesn't know that it's bad. If you're struggling with it and you realize that you're being prideful and you're trying to change it, it's because you already know that it's bad.
Yeah, though it would be interesting to just kind of talk about quickly what pride has been what pride now means in our current culture.
Yeah, so that is a thing we could talk about. So
Because in
it
our
has
current
changed.
culture, pride is viewed as a positive thing.
Hmm.
And it's not really the exact same type of pride that like biblical pride, but it's still a form of pride in its own way.
Yeah, so there are multiple types of pride. So pride in our culture, you might say like, I'm proud of my son, or
Yeah.
I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of what I achieved. You could be proud of the group you're in.
Yeah, that's the biggest like pride that our culture is dealing with right now.
Yeah, so like celebrating some demographic aspect of who you are.
Yeah.
Which
It's still pride in its own way.
it's still pride, but it can be bad and it can be not bad. Like I say, there's multiple kinds of pride. So like to say you're proud of your son is not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily the sin kind of pride. Because you could just be like, glad of his achievements and happy, and that is lumped into pride. Pride becomes bad when it starts being, oh, look at my son, he's so good. He's better than yours, or something, something like that.
Yeah, or it could be like, look at my son, look what I have raised him to do, like how
Yes, and
how
so
smart I
that
am.
would be almost. So in that instance, that would be like viewing the accomplishments of another and attributing them to yourself as if you are the sole reason why they are as good as they are, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that is pride.
Yeah, because obviously the main type of pride is being proud of yourself or proud of something you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess so. If you're saying like you're proud of your son, you could either be saying that in like a way like, oh, my son is doing good, or you could say like, look how well I've raised him, or something like that.
And this is so even Paul talked about boasting sometimes, and where he would say, I could boast, and it wouldn't be wrong for me, because in some things, like, he had done some pretty amazing things, and it wouldn't be totally wrong for him to boast, but he decided not to, because he didn't want people attributing too much to him. But so there is kind of like an okay pride or boasting where you're just kind of happy for an achievement someone has done, or happy for who they are, or even for yourself, but you're not you see what I'm saying, though? It's not like twisted yet to the point where you're thinking that it's all because of you, or that you're so great, or you're comparing yourself to someone else and saying that they're, lesser than you, or you're better than them, something like that. That's when it becomes twisted. So yeah, in 2 Corinthians 10, Paul talks about not boasting beyond his measure, but only within the measure of spirit which God apportioned to us as a measure to reach even as far as you. So he's talking about the churches he has actually personally reached out to, and only boasting in the work that he has done and not the work of others, essentially. And even there, though, he attributes it to God, though. The sphere which God apportioned to us. So he's not attributing it to himself.
Yeah.
Anyway, that might be a little bit of a tangent. Generally, in culture, people don't view pride as that much of a bad thing, though. Unless it gets to the point where it's like, you're super egotistical and narcissistic. At that point, people are like, okay, he's just a jerk, and they don't like that anymore. But being proud by itself is usually not looked at as bad, but it essentially, it is.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the part we're not going to spend a lot of time on is, saying that pride is bad. I want to say it's in 1 John. It says that pride is of the world. There's a psalm where it says that God abhors the proud, essentially, something like that. Plenty of other examples. It's not a good thing to be.
And I think it kind of comes from a place of this culture is really wanting to push towards self-worth. Because this culture sees the problems we have in this world with people feeling worthless and they have no point on this earth. And they try to address that problem by saying you are worth something within of yourself. Your worth comes from within.
Yeah.
And therefore you should be proud of who you are, of yourself.
Proud of you, and you don't need anyone else. You can do it by your own power.
And that becomes then you become your own God.
More or less.
Yeah, because you're like, okay, this culture is pushing for us to believe that our worth comes from us. And we should be proud of ourselves and therefore become our own God.
And that we can do anything if we try hard enough. And that we can be anything that we want to be. Those are the things that culture is saying, is that essentially you are God.
Yeah, and I would like, and I think from a Christian perspective, we should realize that our worth should only be on the side of God, or in light of who we are in relation to God. We are only worth something because we are sons and daughters of God.
Yeah.
And are made in His image.
And because in every ability or skill or thing that we're good at comes from God. It's not we who decided that we're going to be good at, a sport or at some game or something, right?
Yeah.
It comes from God.
Because we're made in God's image, we have inherent worth. It's not because of anything we've done, because we did not create ourselves.
Well, if we think back to our podcast on finding purpose without God, is that if there is no God, if we were not created, then we are just animals. We are not that much different than pigs. We can just reason.
Yeah.
And ultimately, there's no enduring meaning to our existence.
Yeah.
With God, there is a meaning to our existence. And so really our meaning, our worth, our value comes from God. Yeah.
And so along that logic, I don't think there's any worth of an animal. An animal doesn't have any intrinsic worth as far as...
Not in the same way, because it's not an eternal creature.
Yeah. So
unless dogs go to heaven.
That's why the in the light of the Bible, animals were just like any other living thing. The only reason we're different is because we're made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so our worth is only in relation to our likeness to God.
Mm.
And so if we're not worth anything, then we should not be proud of anything that we are.
Not be proud of anything that so not proud of ourselves, essentially.
Yeah.
And that goes to talking about attributing. We have to attribute what we can do and who we are to God, not to ourselves. When we start attributing too much to ourselves and thinking that we can do more than we actually can, or that it was by our own power, that is when we overstep the boundary and we are being prideful.
Yeah.
So going back to, you mentioned ultimately our prime directive, our ultimate mission is to be like Christ, right? And in relation to pride and humility, there's a really great passage in Philippians chapter 2, which I'll read now. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves, and do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which also was in Christ, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason also God highly exalted him, and bestowed on him the name which is above every name. So, I think this is a really great passage when talking about humility and pride. Because essentially it's saying, have the same attitude that Christ had. And then it gives us a detailed picture of what that attitude was, where he essentially took on the ultimate humility. He humbled himself more than we ever could.
Mm-hmm.
When being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. So even though he was God, he's God. When he was a man, he took on the position of a man. He no longer, and actually this, I forget. There was some footnote not in this Bible, but it was cool. But so if we have this attitude of humbling ourselves to our correct position, which is far below God, then that's the attitude Christ had, even though he was God. He's God.
Yeah.
And then there's also the part where it talks about how we should treat others with humility, which is to regard them as more important than ourselves, and to look out for their interests as well as ours. So that kind of starts to develop this picture of like there's this natural God-given balance of things where we're kind of on an equal level with other people, and then there's God up there. And then as long as we're in that correct balance, then we're not being prideful, is a way of thinking of things. So we wanted to talk a little bit about specifically like ways that pride impacts us or is prevalent in our lives and in Christians' lives. So for instance, so pride is like this. It's just like this hidden thing, and it can be over some really small, insignificant things that people can get prideful about, and it can be over really big things. Everyone, even Christians, will get proud at the stupidest things, like, well, I drink black coffee, I drive stick, I X, Y, and Z, and all these other things.
Yeah.
People get prideful over really silly things, and usually they're not that serious about it, but there can be legitimate pride over those things. I want to say it was talking with on the podcast with Benjamin. We talked about when you're trying to help people through hard times, or you need to be careful. You need to make sure that you're not doing it with pride, because there's certainly a way you can help people that isn't actually helpful, right? And he mentioned that being humble, was very important in that respect. And that's, I think, maybe a bigger thing is it's when you're trying to help people, you can be proud and not help them.
Now, or when somebody's receiving help, they can be too proud to accept help.
Oh yeah, we talked about that too. We talked about that too. Yeah, letting pride in the way of an escape, of a way out.
That comes from people wanting to feel like they can make it on their own. They don't need help.
They are God. They can do it. They just have to try hard enough.
And maybe they probably think, I know, obviously God, I need help from God, but we got to realize that help from God comes in very many different forms.
Mm-hmm. Often in the form of a person.
Yeah, exactly. And so inadvertently, if we're turning away help for a person, we might be turning away what we've asked for.
That's a good point. It's a good point. God uses people as his agents very often.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being proud to the point where you're not willing to give up the control or concede part of the problem to other people. And I think part of that might also come from the idea that, like, well, if you accept help, then you're admitting that you're inadequate or that you couldn't do it on your own. And that is very impactful to a person who is proud, to do that. That they don't do that easily because they're proud. They don't want to admit that they were wrong or that they were unable to do it on their own, essentially. And really, this blocks, like, this kind of pride blocks so many different things. So like, you're not going to change who you are if you're proud. You're not going to take criticism or see the need to improve yourself, right? If you're proud. You're also not likely to fully submit to or accept God. If you think about it, like, because pride goes hand in hand with kind of with control, with who you trust and who you give control in your life, right? If you're really prideful, you think that you're trying to take total control of your life. In order to fully accept God and to trust him, you have to give up that control to him, right?
Yeah.
So does that make sense, that if you're being prideful, you can't really do that because you don't recognize the need to give up control. You think, I've got this. And this has been something in my own life, definitely enough times to notice it, that as long as I was being prideful, I didn't fully trust God. I wasn't fully able to ask him for help because I was able to handle it on my own. Except I wasn't.
Yeah. I guess if you're...
Go ahead.
One of what I've been thinking about is kind of something that's been recently kind of come into my thoughts, and it has been revealed to me recently. One of the ways I've been proud of my own life is I kind of like to look back at the last couple of years of my life and my Christian walk, and outwardly I haven't really made any obvious mistakes or mess ups. I'm doing pretty good. And inwardly I feel like I'm doing pretty good too, but I mean, obviously not quite as good, but...
So you see like a lack of major outward flaws, and you're like, yeah, I got this Christian thing down.
And then I had this, or I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, oh wow, this is a big problem, because I started to see how that mindset kind of separated me from other people in my own mind. Like with a situation I've been through recently where there's a certain person that I feel like has done something wrong to me and to other people. I caught myself thinking that I'm better than this person because they've been making this mistake. And thinking that way can make it so I can't empathize or sympathize with their position.
Yeah.
And then because of that, I cut myself off.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen pretty easily. Feeling that you've been wronged, or not necessarily wronged, or that someone else has done something wrong, and then you haven't done things like that, maybe.
Yeah, and then because I've been deluding myself into thinking that I'm doing pretty good, it's been causing a divide, because I feel like. And so this comes back to what I talked about earlier: is as Christians we can often become pride. We can often fall into pride of our Christianity.
Yeah, of thinking that we have it. That we're doing pretty good.
And that's why Christians have a bad rap with well, hypocrisy and stuff.
Oh yeah, I've definitely done that before too. Of being proud and kind of thinking, yeah, I've got this, you know. And it goes back to thinking about like Christianity as a checked box, whereas like, you know, I vision myself as, you know, I'm a pretty good Christian. You know, I just got to keep on doing this until I die, and I'm good. I'm into heaven, right? And there's this kind of pride to the point where it's like, I don't need anything. I don't necessarily even need God anymore at this point, and it's very wrong. And it divides you from people. It prevents you from learning. It prevents you from sympathizing with other people, especially people who you see as not doing pretty good.
Yeah, and so I guess there's a couple of things I need to remember is that, well, before I was really working on my faith, I did make these mistakes pretty regularly. And it just so happens that I started cutting back on those around this time, same time I started working on my faith. And I got to remember that, because otherwise, if I reverse that, I'll be back where I started.
Right.
The second thing I got to remember is that obviously this is not coming from within myself, and therefore the deficiencies I see in other people are not from within themselves. Though they're the same deficiencies I would have if I was not a Christian.
Yeah, and even maybe sometimes if you are a Christian, right?
Yeah.
We have to be humble to the point where like I think true humility is being able to interact with and form relationships with people who you can see are like have some major serious like sins and flaws, but being humble enough to realize like, hey, you know, we're really ultimately in the same boat.
Yeah, but for the grace of God would I be there as well.
Right. There's a popular quote that I've heard quite a lot.
And I've looking back, I think this is one of the biggest things I struggled with over the past 5 years, I guess, is not empathizing with other people. And I think that comes from a place of, I guess, feeling superior in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think pride is is my biggest flaw right now.
You know, I would say it about myself as well. There's so many people where they would probably say that. Pride is one of the biggest problems that they are facing. And that's because it is so pervasive and it gets so deep within us. And so thinking of a similar thing to what you were talking about where like you don't have like not seeing yourself as having any major obvious flaws is I was actually told when several times when meeting one-on-one with somebody is, you know, they would say like, you know, it's hard for me because, you know, you have some like more obvious, you know, physical, you know, flaws and sin issues you're working with. But for me, it's not like that. All my things are kind of invisible or hidden. They actually said this. And so for them, the issues they saw in themselves as working on were like things like pride or something that they couldn't see as much of. And that's a hard, because there are some issues where it's like, okay, this is very clearly, obviously, you know, a sin. You know, things like, well, obviously physical things like stealing, murdering, lust, you know, things like that. Those are pretty obvious in someone's life, and you can say like for certain like, I did this or I did not do this. Yeah. With things like pride and greed and some of these other things, it's a little bit iffier. So I was actually told in this. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
And you may not realize it until you see the fruits of those things.
That's true.
Which is what has happened to me.
Until you start seeing yourself separating from people or other various negative things.
Yeah.
So I think some people probably do have that. They're kind of in that position where they don't have any like of these obvious physical flaws or sins that they're doing. Their things are more on the interior, and I think really that's true of everyone. It's just a matter of perspective. Yeah. And that could be a struggle, but I think at the same time, the person who said that to me, I kind of think it's a little bit prideful too. maybe just a little bit is well, yes, you still do have the same level of sins and everything, and I don't think they were trying to say that they weren't like that, but it's difficult. What was another thing I was going to say? So, pride really, I would say like pride and selfishness are two things that kind of seep into everything almost. They're like the root of all evil, is wanting better for yourself and thinking more of yourself almost. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things, because we could probably go on, and people who have more examples than us could give much more life experience and stories and examples of how pride has affected them. I want to get your opinion on a quote. It's from C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. Kind of something he said on pride that stuck out to me, which was that a truly humble person would be able to build a cathedral to God and know for a fact that it was the best, most magnificent, glorious cathedral that had ever been built, but not be any more happy or proud about it than if somebody else had built it. So this idea of true humility is being able to do something magnificent, but be just as happy about it as if somebody else had done it.
Oh.
And that really stuck out to me because most of the time when we do something really magnificent, we compare ourselves to others and be like, ha, look at this thing that I did. I can do this. I'm so great. But if we can just view it from a different angle and have pride in it, yes, but pride in the manner of man,
This is a good thing.
I'm proud of my achievement. This is a good thing. And then looking at something somebody else made, I'm proud of that. They did good on that. And
well, I think what the point of that is that we're proud that this thing is done and it's good. We're not proud of the fact that we made it.
Yeah, we're not comparing ourselves to others. We're just happy that it was made.
Yeah, exactly.
And another major way of overstepping the boundaries of pride, which we may not get too much into, is comparing ourselves to others, which you may not think about it, but almost any time you're comparing yourself to someone else, you're doing it seeing oh man, they're doing better than me, or I'm doing better than them, or they're worse than me at this and this and this.
Yeah.
Almost any time you compare yourself to other people, it's bad.
Yeah.
There are a few issues where times when it may be good, like drawing inspiration from their good work and the idea of iron sharpens iron, right? I think I'll just sum up that thought. There's some verses in Galatians that do a pretty good job. Galatians 6. Brethren, even if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself so that you too will not be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But each one must examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone, and not in regard to another. For each one will bear his own load. So, this idea of you're just comparing your own work to your own work. You're not looking around at other people and saying oh man, theirs is better than mine, or mine is way better than theirs. And I think that could be really helpful for a lot of people. I know
Yeah.
The tempting natural thing is to compare ourselves to other people, and then to either raise ourselves up, put them down, or belittle ourselves. And all those things are wrong.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Benjamin's sermon about spiritual growth.
Mm.
Or I'm not sure if it's a sermon or a class. But to know you're growing is to see that you're improving from where you were before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, there's no objective scale, or there's no subjective scale for it. It's
Mm.
comparing to yourself yesterday. So,
Right.
and that's how we should measure ourselves, is in comparison to where we were before, because that's really the only thing that matters.
Comparing to ourselves previously and to God. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like we're looking behind at ourselves and we're looking forward to where we're going.
Yeah.
And when you look to the side, then you get distracted and you veer off somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's also I want to say like a Jordan Peterson quote is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who other people are today.
Uh-huh.
Which, good thought to think about, for sure. Did you have anything else you wanted to go into?
I think I'm pretty good.
So, yeah. Pride is an issue we can talk a lot about. I think we can both agree on that.
Yeah.
And maybe the issue is not so much that there's stuff to talk about. It's that, like, processing it and then talking about it, It's almost something you need to, like, have a more organized argument for. I don't know. But today we've kind of talked a little bit about how it can be so hurtful in so many ways. And it's something to always be thinking about.
Yeah. It can cause a lot of divisions between people. Comparing ourselves to other people and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Because if you're lifting yourself up or belittling yourself and disrupting that natural balance, you're naturally creating distance between you and other people, right? And that's not good. People are equal. We are equal creations of God. When you make yourself or others higher or lower, you've done something wrong.
You're putting distance, yeah.
You're creating distance and a whole other load of bad things.
Because at the end of the day, the scale that God judges us on is, have we sinned or have we not sinned?
Yeah.
And we're all on the same side of that scale.
Yeah, we've all sinned, and then
so in God's eyes, we're all the same as far as our righteousness, I guess.
Yeah, and except in the cases where we have accepted Him and been forgiven.
Yeah.
But we all are in the same bucket from the start. We all have the same opportunity to continue in sin or to change. So, on that thought, I think we're going to end here.
Yeah.
It's been podcast episode 16. That's a lot. So just remember that salty Christians aren't proud Christians. That's right. So you don't want to be you don't want to be a proud I'm going to say this wrong. You don't want to be a proud Christian, because then you're not going to be salty. And that's how we're going to end on. Go and be a salty Christian. There we go.